Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Half-Life podcast video. Thought I would mix another one of these in while I was wrapping up the Cryptids and Monsters video. I'm probably going to do one more of those and then give it a rest since I've already done about 10 or 11 videos actually. So a good go around on this series. But in this case, this next monster encountered within the Half-Life game, at least I think it's the next one, is a very memorable one. It was so much fun going through this monster slash boss. And I mean, when I say fun, I mean like hella fun. And to this day it remains one of the most infamous monsters because of how you have to get through it. Is what makes essentially the beauty of Half-Life. There are certain situations where you just can't shoot things forward, like you can't just mindlessly shoot. No, you have to use your mind, you have to think, you have to use strategy. This is in this case a perfect example. And I'm talking about this very memorable monster. You know it, I know it, known as the Tentacle, encountered within one of the most mesmerizing stages of the game. So let's go ahead, let's talk about all the info associated with this monster slash boss. So what is this tentacle? Well, its official name, it seems like, is known as the Hypersuctor sensitiva, at least I guess according to what the Black Mesa scientist mentioned, but it is a boss found within the game, specifically on the first, at least the first level that it's found, considered the blast pit or the chapter, since Half-Life loves calling these chapters instead. And it is a creature that comes in certain pairs. Like the first time it's encountered, there's 3 of them. Then in other times throughout the game, you either face 1 or I believe 2 at the same time. So it all depends, I guess, on the circumstance itself. Gigantic creature, possibly the largest one within the entire game. I can't think of any other one that stands out being larger than this game. I mean, it absolutely dwarfs Gordon and anyone else within the game. And on top of that, what you see in part of in the game itself is only part of the monster. Most of it is still hidden underneath certain areas of the level. But what's really cool is that eventually you get to travel down that level and then you get to see the rest of its body, which I'll highlight here in a minute. But in this case, what you see though is very, very memorable. I mean, look at it. Look at how it looks like. It's a gigantic tentacle, hence the name or the moniker for it, with, in this case, very large serrated thorns on its entire neck, or the closest thing you could call it to a neck, and then a head that seems to have an eye, but for the fact that eye is more like a sensory device rather than, let's say, an actual visual eye. Then it has these pincers or whatever is the case on its mouth, which plays for a very memorable scene. And then finally its most distinct notion, which is that large beak, hook, nose, whatever that is, that has a very, very sharp point, which it uses for one specific purpose, and it's this. It absolutely tracks its prey based on sound. That's what makes it so memorable. That's what makes it so beautiful when the makers of Half-Life made this creature. So this is what happens when you first encounter it. So you go to that blast pit, and once you're there, then you have a very, very shocking sequence, in-game sequence. That's another thing I love about the Half-Life game, is that these things did not involve cutscenes. Instead, you lived the actual cutscene itself. You saw it play as you're walking around the level. And in this case, there you are just basically walking around the office complex or whatever it is with that machinery, and then there's a scientist, and then immediately something comes forward. This tentacle smashes that glass, and then that's it. It pulls the scientist in, much to your shock, much to your horror, and then you, of course, presumably the scientist dies, gets eaten, or whatever is the case thereafter. It made for a very, very shocking intro, and it was interesting to read that the makers of Half-Life knew they had something special when they witnessed the gamers, the ones that test gamers for this game, and their reaction to that cutscene, the in-room scene as well. So they knew they were onto something. But after that, you basically then realize, A, your weapons have no effect on this creature, because when you're in this level and you're so used to the game shooting at things, there you are trying to do so, but your weapons do nothing. They are invincible to them. They just basically bounce off, except for the fact, like, if you use large melee heavy blast type weapons, then yes, it'll retreat, or the other multiple tentacles will retreat as well, but that'll give you just a temporary retrieve. And that's because then you have to rely, like I mentioned earlier, on strategy, because you quickly realize with that large beak, whatever that thing is in front of its face, that thing will immediately kill you within 1 to 2 strikes. This is why this tentacle is so territorial. It uses whatever kind of sensory organs it has to detect sound and to also detect vibrations, and anything that it finds within its proximity it considers a danger, and then immediately starts pecking at it. And what makes it so eerie is that even if you're not making a single sound within the game, this thing is still pecking at random locations. Like, it is trying to always find something. Like, it knows that you're there, it can't really see you, and so it's just trying to gauge you to come out. And then if it finds you, even at random, then that's it. 1 or 2 pecks later, then you are gone and you have to start over within the level. So absolutely beautiful work when it came to this creation of this monster. And then also with regards to it, you can use strategy in terms of your own weapon, but you have to have pretty much just one weapon works. So because it uses sound and surface vibrations to find you, you have to distract it. And the perfect weapon for this is, of course, the grenade. And that's just mainly through, and that's what I love playing this level, it's mainly through trial and error, because I remember trying out different weapons and then finding out, of course, the hard way, that this tentacle was killing me repeatedly. And so whenever that happened, I finally honed in on the grenade, and when that happened, it was perfect. You can throw the grenade to the very far corner, it blows up. Luckily you don't make any sound when you throw it, but then when it blows up in the far corner of the room, the tentacles all start swarming in there, and that makes for an exhilarating sequence, because now you only have maybe about 5-6 seconds or so to move to the next destination before those tentacles realize nothing is there. And so they actually go back to the previous location, or they start just pecking away again at random locations. So that was also another masterstroke. Just absolutely beautiful, beautiful design by the gamers, and that you think you can get away with the grenades, but you can't. You only have a limited time to work with. And imagine if you're in a situation where you have limited grenades too, then you're going to be basically at the mercy of these things, which makes it again so exciting when you're playing this game. Because I remember clearly, just it's so much fun. I remember having to just walk through inch by inch, crouch through this game until I could finally get to the part that I needed, and then running out of those grenades, and then wondering exactly what I was gonna do. Like, it was so crazy. But the whole point is, at least with the first part of the blast pit, is eventually you get to a destination where you turn on, I guess, those afterburners, whatever that is, and when that happens, it turns on this huge fire, and then it basically roasts these tentacles alive, and then it kills them. That's the only way, essentially, to kill them. The only part of the game where you get to truly kill a tentacle, because they are encountered throughout other parts of the game, but if I remember correctly, you cannot do anything to them at those points. You simply have to get around them, and that also makes it so very exciting. So also with regards to these tentacles, I was mentioning earlier, at first you only get to see a certain part of them, but once you kill those tentacles within the blast pit, then you get to see the bottom of its quote-unquote base, which is quite cool when you, because it's just a little more of a almost like trivia that makes this game so fascinating. So sure enough, whenever you blow them up in that blast pit, then you get to go down to where those tentacles came from, and you get to see this. So what this is, it could be still part of its body, or it could have been larger but incinerated again because of that blast pit that you just turned on. But presumably this was the rest of its body, so it makes it seem like this body almost like King Ghidorah almost. It's one large stomach with those three tentacles coming out. But what's heavily debated even to this day from these gamers is whether A, this is one body with three heads, all thinking similarly, or one body with three heads, all thinking individually. And then B, whether this body, this bottom portion, truly is something that has to be underwater, because again, that's where this body was originally found before you incinerated everything during the blast pit, or whether it's just happens to be circumstance, and instead this base can exist outside of water. I seem to think that it's the second part, because if I remember correctly, there's another part in the game where you encounter a tentacle, but it's in a more desert-like environment, and clearly there's no water during that part. So it makes it seem like yes, that there's it's this base can exist outside of water itself. And I seem to think also that it's a much larger base than before, but because of the incineration, then we never get to truly see its complete body outright. But it does make it seem like it's so much fun to realize that this thing, as gigantic as it was within the blast pit, you just saw a tiny, like almost like an iceberg, a portion of it, and the rest of it, the larger body itself, was somewhere hidden on the bottom. So quite interesting, so fascinating. So but that's it. That's really all the info tied to this unique, this very memorable monster. It is found one more time in another game, and that is Opposing Force. Not so many tentacles. I believe there's only 2 tentacles that are encountered within that game, but still, that was a nice little nod to include it. Unfortunately, nowhere else, not even in Half-Life 2. It would have been cool to see how that the tentacles survived, quote unquote survived, into Half-Life 2. Presumably they did not, because again, at the end of, in this case, the chapter of Half-Life 1, everything was pretty much blown up. But if they made it somewhere, who knows? Also, another thing that's mysterious and it was never answered is how these tentacles came to Earth. Like obviously, like they were teleported, but when did that happen? How did that happen? Because these things being so large makes it seem like they must have been like a smaller size at one point and then grew into the size you see within the game. So who knows when it happened, or if they were just outright just as is the same size when they were teleported over. So another interesting thing to debate about. Maybe they'll be back in Half-Life 3. That would be really, really good to see in the future. So alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.